My name is David Flad. I'm the founder of Release Over 20. I started practicing Release Over 20 maybe 15 years ago, and honestly, it was just being selfish. Here in Charleston, we don't have the best speckled trout fishery, and I wanted better quality and more trout to catch. And I started asking around, like, will there ever be an upper slot for trout? And was told, very unlikely the way our laws are made. And I think, like most people, you get frustrated when you don't have control and you just get mad and wish that a law would change. And I kind of stewed about it for a few days, and it just all of a sudden hit me on the head that I don't have to wait for a law. I could just make my own upper slot for trout and immediately start contributing toward potentially a better trout fishery. Once I started with Release Over 20, I started making it my mission to learn about the biology and reading research papers and digging into the booklets about the fishery and pulling out facts that I think if the average person knew, it would really affect their decisions that they make. One in particular is if you take spotted sea trout here in South Carolina, a 20-inch trout is 4.5 years old. It's like 95% chance it's a female, and she's going to spawn 20 million eggs a year. Now, when you catch that trophy-sized trout, if you didn't know anything about that fish, you might just put it in the cooler and say, this is great, the trout fishery is amazing. But when you realize how rare and special that fish is and what it's contributing to the future, it's kind of like a no-brainer to put it back, in my opinion. And you know, not everyone's going to agree with that, and that's okay. But if we can do everything that we can do to get the facts into people's minds so that they just know automatically about the fish that they're catching, so they can make an informed decision if they still choose to keep that fish. Like, we're not saying don't do that, but we're just saying now that you know the facts, like, you decide what to do. And to me, it's like, just my personal opinion, it's like, I want to put that fish back because I want to make the future better. I think at the end of the day, if that's something that Release Over 20 is able to accomplish, just getting that knowledge into people's minds so they can make an informed decision, then we've been a success. Every species is its own entity. Like, it'd be hard to say how they've all changed in a collective way. I can tell you about flounder, especially in this, really it's the whole Southeast, but especially South Carolina. The flounder fishery has just been on a 40-year decline. And it's really interesting, going back to before I started Release Over 20, I had a fall up here where we're fishing today where I caught, I think, 5 flounder over 20 inches, and I thought the flounder fishing is as good as it's ever been. And a few weeks later, our South Carolina DNR came to our fishing club and threw the chart up showing the decline in flounder and explained all the reasons why, and I was like flabbergasted because I had no idea. So I consider myself just an average angler that wants to do the right thing but was just honestly ignorant about the facts. When I saw the facts that they presented, I couldn't believe it. Like, all keeper-sized flounder are female, which hardly anybody, I didn't know that, and I know a lot of people didn't know that, especially when you catch that big one that's releasing a lot more eggs. You know it's a female, and in my experience, almost everyone that catches a keeper flounder puts it in their cooler because it's great eating. But we need to put some of those back to sustain the population and maybe turn that curve around. So along with flounder in the Southeast, the redfish fishery has been in decline, steady decline for the last over 10 years. And redfish is, if you live in South Carolina, it's like the #1 saltwater targeted fish. A lot of people don't realize that all the fish that we catch inshore up to 30 inches or so are subadults, so they've never spawned. And it's really important that you let those fish that are close to the slot go so that they can reach what we call escapement, which means that they're now free to live the rest of their lives and join the spawning population. You know, we love this bull red fishery, which we call redfish like from 35 to 40 inches. And that's because we have this upper slot. We have to release them over 23 inches. But you have to understand that those fish could be 15 to 40 years old. Sometimes a lot of anglers, they're older than the angler. And we see them get mishandled and abused a lot when they're hung by a boga grip and thrown back in the water, kept out of the water for minutes at a time while they get pictures. We really need to respect our elders and protect these fish because they're gonna spawn for the next 40 years. And if they're killed at age 15, you know, they're not gonna be spawning the next 25 years. So we're trying to do a lot with educating people on how to best handle the fish. And the main thing is like keep them in the water. Definitely don't hang them by their lip. We can collectively make a big difference in how many fish survive release if we just follow these basic best practices for redfish. Redfish are amazing for many reasons. Like we catch them on structure. I've tagged for over 12 years. And what I've found with tagging is that the subadult fish will come back to the exact piece of structure every single year while they're subadult. But you know, the amazing thing about them is like we have this incredible fishery here that we call flood tide fishing, where you can see we're surrounded by marsh. On a really high tide, that marsh will flood and the redfish will push up there and nose down and stick their tail out of the water as they're eating fiddler crabs, which is amazing. So it's like hunting and fishing. You're out there poling really quietly, seeing a tail flagging in the grass. It's pretty incredible. But then at low tide, if you can get in these really shallow spots, you'll see them sometimes crawling around on their belly with half their body out of the water. So it's pretty amazing. We're really fortunate to have such a great game fish here.
Hi, I'm Adam Farr. I'm a board member of Release Over 20 and act as the treasurer. So Release Over 20 uses scientific data to try and persuade anglers on their own account to catch and release fish that would otherwise be legally allowed to keep. For one, obviously, I 100% agree with the mission and have always wanted to practice conservation. And then more specifically, I had a good friend of mine who's also on the board, Kerry Browning, who I fish with quite often. And he had wanted to get involved. And so he and I met with Dave when he was still kind of doing Release Over 20 as a side project. And he wanted to create its own standalone 501c3. And having had some experience in the philanthropy world with some startups, just thought I could help. But I guess most specifically for me, it's obviously the mission and then the people involved with the mission, and specifically Release Over 20. You know, if you look across quality of character of the people involved with this, with our group, it's I would say it's extremely high, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
My name is Michael Collier, and I'm a board member with Release Over 20. My role with Release Over 20, I specialize in kind of web applications and web tech. I've been building web-related products for over 15 years, so I help a lot with website, our donation platform, and then our entry program as well. So several years ago, there was a Hadrils Expo, and I went to see somebody talk about big trout. I was like, oh, this is gonna be really cool. And then as I kind of got in there and the seminar started, David Flad was talking about the trout and also Release Over 20. And all of it honestly just really clicked with me. I've lived here for a long time. I actually practiced conservation just by default. Fishing here, my dad and I would go out and we would take a couple home every now and then for dinner, but 90% of the fish we caught, we would throw back because we'd love to do it. We wanted them to be there when we got back. I wanted to see what I could do to help, so I reached out and met with Dave and actually Adam at the time, and try to see how I get involved starting back then. I think it's important just to be conservation minded in general in today's age, just with all the people we have on the planet, and releasing larger fish to help with our science-backed population increases. So it's something that we can do that is positive reinforcement, and I feel really good about that, and kind of sharing it with others.
If you look at whenever people talk about release mortality, which is basically how many fish die upon catch and release, the number is usually 8%. Now, that's a big number, right? 8 out of 100 fish are going to die, and it's usually because of bad handling practices. So we partner with another nonprofit called Keep Fish Wet, and if you follow their principles, it forces you to rethink and reframe what you do when you catch a fish that you plan to release. For example, they recommend only keeping a fish out of the water for 10 seconds. Now think about that. That's like hold your breath and see how long it takes you to feel uncomfortable. It's probably going to be a little more than 10 seconds. Well, what I do in my boat is I always fill my release well with water right as soon as I start the trip. And that way, it lets me meet that requirement by, if I catch the fish, I can take the hook out and put it right in the release well, while I go and get my ruler, my tagging gun, my camera, and then the fish is fine. He's swimming around in the release well. I can pull him out, measure him, tag him, put him back in. And then I can get my camera, pull him out, take a picture, put him back in, and then when I'm ready to release it, I can just put it in the water. So that takes a plan. You have to think ahead. You got to fill your live well, you got to have everything ready to go. But if you don't have a plan, what you're doing is keeping that fish out of the water, flopping around on the bottom of the boat, maybe for minutes at a time. The likelihood of it dying is pretty high. So it just kind of forces you to have a plan. You know, wet your hands, use a rubber net. There's a lot of things that you can do to make a difference. But we can, if we all were to do that, that number wouldn't be 8%, it might be 3 or 2%, which is, when you look at a fishery, that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of fish. It's a big difference. To that end, what we do have is a way for you to take a picture of your fish. It doesn't have to be on a ruler. We can tell if it's over 20, and also we're not the police. We're doing this for conservation. Release that fish, and then you can upload this to our database. We only ask the very minimal information, like how to get a hold of you and what state you released it in, not your GPS or anything like that. And we have a system of rewards that's really appealing to fishermen, but it's not enough to cause competition per se. So we have like 40 corporate sponsors who donate us their product. We keep it in inventory, and then every month we do 4 completely transparent live giveaways where every fish entered is like a raffle ticket. So the more fish that you enter, the better chances of winning, just like the lottery or something. So I think to date, over the last 5 years, we've given at least $20,000 worth of product away. And you know, if you're a fisherman and you enter your fish and we happen to pull your number, we just send you a box. Like, nothing costs anyone a dime. Everything is completely free. And you know, it's just a fun way for people to contribute. But we also get some sort of pseudoscience-y data. Like, we can tell, we can make charts of like the distribution of fish. We have one for trout that shows how many trout 20 to 21 were released, 21 to 22, and all the way up to 30 inches. And interestingly, it's a perfect bell curve, which is like just from entry data. So social media is great because even though we started it here in South Carolina, it literally took off in all states that have inshore fisheries. So we actually have participants from Texas all the way up the Gulf Coast, through Florida, and all the way up, now that we have striper, even all the way up till Maine. It's just the power of social media, you know, to get the word out. We are still seeing year to year our participation growing by like 30% or more. And that's going to get even better, I think, as we add more species and also add some new ways to enter fish. You know, the landscape has changed a lot since 2020. And I'm just proud to be a part of that push to sort of get people to think that conservation is cool, when maybe in the past they looked down on it and it was more about keeping your limit. Now it's more like taking a picture of the fish you're releasing to make it cool. The whole reason we're doing this is for the future. It's for our kids and grandkids. And interestingly, younger kids embrace this concept instantly, whereas it's the adults that don't so much. So we're trying to focus on, you know, getting the kids involved and having them lead the way. Like, I always try to post other people's releases and call them leaders because they're leading by example. You know, it's the people doing it that is the power behind the mission. Like, you know, we're just all volunteers and we're trying to do the right thing for the right reason, and it's really just getting more people involved. There's 11 million saltwater trips a year in South Carolina. I don't think a lot of people know that. If we could convince 30% of them to follow Release Over 20, how can you say that wouldn't have a measurable impact? It has to.